What if a single act of kindness made decades ago and long forgotten returned to knock on your door in the middle of a snowstorm? That's exactly what happened to Jack, a quiet, single dad in a mountain town when he found a woman asleep in a broken car. And she looked at him like he was someone she'd been waiting for her whole life. Before we dive into this heartwarming story of second chances and quiet miracles, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, heal, and stay with you long after they end. Now, let's begin. Single dad found a woman sleeping in a broken car. She woke and said, "Why did you leave in 1998? The blizzard had crept in like a silent thief, blanketing the mountain road in a sheet of white that swallowed the horizon. Jack Monroe tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the wipers thudded back and forth in protest. The headlights of his old pickup cut a narrow path through the snowfall, the road barely visible beneath accumulating drifts. It was past 10, and the temperature outside had plunged below zero. He should have been home by now, warming a can of soup and helping Ethan with his science project. But an unexpected delivery had come through. At the last minute, 2 crates of emergency supplies for the ranger station 20 miles up the ridge. Jack couldn't say no. Not when every extra dollar meant a week of gas groceries or another copay for Ethan's checkups. He rounded a bend, slowly tires crunching on ice. That's when he saw it, a faded blue sedan half buried in snow sitting awkwardly off the shoulder. Its hazard lights flickered weakly, one bulb out. The rear bumper hung loose on one side and the driver's side window was fogged over from the inside. Jack slowed to a crawl and rolled down his window. Cold air slapped his face. "Hello," he called, raising his voice above the wind. No answer, just the low hum of the engine idling and the whisper of snow falling. He parked his truck on the other side of the road, grabbed his flashlight, and crossed cautiously. The sedan was an older model rust along the wheel wells. He tapped on the glass. Inside, a woman was curled on the driver's seat beneath a threadbare blanket. Her coat was zipped to the neck, but her cheeks were pale lips tinged faintly blue. For a moment, she didn't move. Jack knocked again, harder this time. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Her eyes fluttered open. She blinked, disoriented, then stared at him with a look that made the air leave his lungs. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Then she whispered so faintly he wasn't sure he'd heard her right, "Why did you leave in 1998? Jack stepped back instinctively. "What?" She sat up slowly, the blanket slipping off her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, face drawn with exhaustion, but those eyes, they locked onto his with something between anguish and accusation. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I think you've mistaken me for someone else." "I don't." Her body trembled. I thought you were him." Jack glanced at the storm building behind them. "Look, we can figure this out later. You can't stay here. It's not safe. You'll freeze out here tonight." She hesitated, then nodded. He helped her gather a small duffel bag from the back seat, her only possession, then guided her to the truck. She moved slowly, limping slightly, her breath fogging in the icy air. He noticed bruises on her wrists peeking from under her sleeves and filed the detail away in silence. Back in the truck, she sat stiffly, eyes cast forward. Jack turned the heat up and pulled away from the shoulder. "Name's Jack," he said, voice low. "I live about 10 minutes down the ridge. I can offer you a place to warm up for the night." "That all right?" She nodded once. "Rebecca." They drove in silence. The snow thickened, swirling in the high beams like ash from an invisible fire. Jack stole glances at her. This woman who looked at him like a ghost from her past. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes told another story. Sorrow, fear, and something else. Something fragile. Hope, maybe. The cabin came into view, nestled among pine trees bowed with snow. Jack parked under the awning, killed the engine, and led her inside. It wasn't much, just a wood stove, 2 bedrooms and walls lined with books and photographs, but it was warm. Lived in. Safe. Ethan, Jack's 12-year-old son, sat at the kitchen table with a pencil in hand and a sleepy scowl on his face. "You're late," Ethan said, then paused as he saw the woman behind his father. "Who's that?" Jack set Rebecca's bag down gently. "This is Rebecca. Her car broke down. She'll be staying the night." "Go get another blanket from the closet, will you?" Ethan nodded, disappearing down the hall. Rebecca stood awkwardly near the door, clutching the strap of her bag. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Jack said. "Trouble would have been driving past you." He handed her a mug of instant cocoa. She cradled it, eyes finally meeting his again. "You really don't remember me," she said quietly. He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "Should I?" She gave a sad smile. "Probably not. It was just a moment. In 1998. A train station. I was 17. You gave me a ticket home." Jack went still. I was sitting on a bench, she continued, crying. "My wallet had been stolen, and I didn't have a way back. I was thinking about doing something awful. Then you came out of nowhere, handed me a ticket, and said, 'You look like you've been waiting to be saved.'" Jack stared at her. Slowly, fragments stirred Salt Lake City Christmas lights through falling snow, a girl on a bench, but they slipped through his fingers like mist. "I was young," he said finally. "Passed through town once for a job. Could have been me, I suppose." Rebecca set her mug down with trembling hands. "I've been looking for you ever since. Not every day, not every year, but when things got bad, I thought of that night." Outside, the wind howled, shaking the windows. Inside, the room felt suspended as if time itself were holding its breath. Jack swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Why now? She looked down. I didn't know where else to go, and somehow that was enough. Jack took a long breath, walked over to the stove, and threw in another log. The fire cracked and hissed, casting warm shadows across the walls. "You're safe now," he said simply. For the first time since she stepped into his life, Rebecca's shoulders sagged with something like relief. But in her eyes the storm hadn't passed. Not yet, not completely. And Jack knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Jack barely slept. He lay on the old leather couch in the living room, half listening to the fire crackling low in the stove, half listening to every creak in the walls. Rebecca had taken the spare room. He'd offered it without hesitation. But now that silence had fallen and the snow beat softly against the windows, his mind churned with questions. Why did she remember him so clearly if he was even the man she thought he was? And what kind of life had led her to be sleeping in a frozen car, bruised and alone? When the first light of dawn filtered through the slats of the blinds, Jack rose stiff and unrested. The house was quiet. Ethan was still asleep. He moved toward the kitchen, started the kettle for coffee, then paused when he saw Rebecca sitting at the table. She was already awake, dressed in the same clothes from last night, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea he hadn't heard her make. Her eyes were distant, watching the wind stir drifts outside the window. "You sleep? At all?" Jack asked gently. Rebecca shook her head. "Didn't want to. Dreams aren't much better than reality lately." He didn't push. She turned slightly toward him. Her face, now illuminated by morning light, looked softer, but the bruises were more visible too along her jaw near her temple. Jack's gaze lingered a moment too long. "I didn't fall down the stairs, if that's what you're thinking," she said. Jack exhaled. "I didn't think you did." She nodded, once then stared back into the snow. "I left 3 weeks ago. No money, no car at first. I walked, rode buses, took that old sedan off a friend who owed me. It barely made it out of Reno." Jack leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You got family somewhere." "No one I'd want to call family," she said. "And the few friends I had, they either judged or looked away." She paused. "But I remembered this town. I remembered a boy with tired eyes and kind hands who didn't expect anything when he gave me a second chance." Jack said nothing. "I wasn't even sure it was you," she continued. "But when I saw you through the window of the gas station last night, I followed. Stupid, maybe. But—" She trailed off. "I didn't know where else to go." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "You came a long way on a maybe." "Sometimes that's all you've got left," she whispered. Before he could respond, Ethan appeared in the hallway, hair a mess, rubbing his eyes. "Is she staying?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Rebecca smiled weakly. "Just for a little while, if that's okay." Ethan looked at his dad. Jack gave a slight nod. The boy shrugged and shuffled off toward the bathroom. "Sorry," Rebecca said after a moment. "I didn't mean to complicate things." Jack poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and handed one to her. "We've had enough empty in this house lately. You're not a complication." They drank in silence. Rebecca's eyes fell on a photo on the wall, Jack younger bearded, holding a toddler on his shoulders, both of them grinning wide. Her voice softened. "Your son. He looks like your wife." Jack blinked. "You knew," Rebecca gestured toward the house. "There are no women's shoes by the door. Just one toothbrush in your bathroom. A boy that age should have a mom fussing over him before school. And a man like you who lets a stranger into his home in the middle of a storm, that's a man who's known loss." Jack's chest tightened. She wasn't wrong. "Megan died 6 years ago," he said quietly. "Ovarian cancer. Came fast. Ethan was 5. Rebecca's expression fell. "I'm sorry." "He still talks to her sometimes," Jack added, his voice thin. "Thinks I don't hear, but I do. Kids find ways to keep their worlds whole even after they crack. They sat with that truth for a while." Then Rebecca said, "You're a good father." Jack looked at her. "You're kind to say that. But good fathers don't always feel like good men at 2 a.m. when they've got overdue bills and a son asking questions you don't have answers to." She smiled. "Maybe that's exactly what makes you one." The moment was real, uncluttered by pity or pretense. Jack felt something in him shift slightly, like ice beginning to melt after too long in the cold. Ethan returned to the kitchen backpack slung over one shoulder. "Bus comes in 15, Jack said. "Eat something." "I will." Ethan paused at the door, then turned to Rebecca. "Do you play piano?" Rebecca blinked. "I used to." "Why, we've got one. In the shed. Dad got it cheap. Needs tuning, but it kinda works. You can play it if you want." Rebecca's smile returned genuine this time. "Maybe I will." Ethan left for school. Jack washed the mugs. Rebecca lingered near the window, watching the snow ease up. "Storm's breaking," she said. Jack nodded. "But roads'll still be rough. You can stay until they clear." She looked at him, her voice cautious. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said. "For now." But as he walked past the duffel bag she'd left near the door, something fell out, a small envelope yellowed with age. Jack bent down, picked it up. A name scrawled across the front in familiar handwriting. It was his own. He froze. Rebecca turned. Their eyes met. "I've kept it since the day you gave me that ticket. You tucked it into the sleeve of my coat. I never opened it." Jack's voice was barely audible. "I don't remember writing that." "That's okay," she said gently. "I remembered for both of us." And suddenly Jack realized this wasn't just a stranger in need of shelter. This was a woman carrying part of his story. The part he'd forgotten he gave away. The envelope rested between them on the kitchen table like something sacred, fragile, yellowed, a relic from a night neither of them had truly forgotten. Jack didn't reach for it. He sat across from Rebecca, both hands wrapped tightly around a mug gone cold. The cabin was quiet. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that stretched into the woods like untouched memory. Rebecca spoke first. "I never opened it," she said softly. "Not once." Jack's brows drew together. "Why?" She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I was afraid if I read it, the magic of that night would disappear, that it would just be a few words and nothing more. But as long as I didn't open it, I could believe there was more to it, that maybe it meant something." Jack leaned back in his chair, stunned. He tried to recall that night with more clarity. Salt Lake City, the heavy snow, the scent of burnt coffee in the air. He had only been there for a day, passing through after losing a job on a construction site outside Reno. Broke and broken himself, he'd stopped at the train station to consider going home. or maybe not going anywhere at all. I remember seeing someone crying. He said finally, the words emerging like fog on a mirror. A young girl on a bench. I remember thinking she looked like she'd already given up. Rebecca's eyes glistened. That was me. I didn't think I had anything to give, Jack said, shaking his head. But I had that extra ticket. My buddy bailed on me last minute. I was going to eat the cost, but something in me said, she needs it more. I didn't think it would matter. Rebecca swallowed hard. It saved my life. Jack looked up sharply. She nodded slowly, hands trembling as she finally reached for the envelope. She didn't open it, just traced her finger along his name. I was 17, she began, and alone. My mom kicked me out after I told her I was pregnant. The father was long gone. I was living in a shelter, barely eating. The day we met, someone stole what little money I had left. I sat in that station planning how I'd slip into the tracks after dark. Her voice caught. But then you came. You didn't know me. You didn't ask questions. You just handed me the ticket and said, you look like you've been waiting to be saved. Jack stared at her, stunned. I took the train back to a cousin's place in Oregon, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I had the baby, a little girl. I named her Hope. Jack inhaled sharply. She was my reason to keep going. I finished school, became a nurse. For a while, things were good. Then, life got harder. Wrong people, wrong choices. She looked down. I lost custody of her after my ex convinced the court I wasn't stable. Jack's chest ached. Did you try to fight it? Of course, she said, a flash of fire in her voice. But you don't win much when you're broke and sleeping in your car. There was a long pause. Rebecca's voice broke the silence again, softer now. But I always kept the envelope. I wanted to show her one day, to tell her, you exist because one man chose kindness. Jack stared at the envelope, stunned by the depth of what he'd unknowingly given her. I didn't know, he murmured. I never thought. One gesture. Rebecca looked at him, eyes shimmering. That's the thing, Jack. You never know how far a small act can reach. That's why I came. I didn't expect a miracle. I needed to touch the beginning again. Jack leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low and raw. You still looking for her? She's 12, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. Lives with my aunt in Oregon. I send letters, but they never write back. I've been fighting for visitation. They say if I can prove stability, a safe place to live steady income. She trailed off, and Jack already saw where the pieces connected. You're hoping to stay here, he said gently. Start over. Rebecca winced. I know it's a lot. I know I'm a stranger. But this place, it feels like a beginning. Jack exhaled. I can't promise much. I work long hours. Ethan's already been through so much. I'd never hurt him, she said quickly, eyes wide. I wouldn't be here if I didn't mean that. Jack believed her. He didn't know why, but he did. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at Ethan the night before, like he was a reminder of something beautiful the world could still offer. Or maybe it was because Jack recognized the same haunted shadows in her that he'd lived with after losing Megan. We'll figure it out, he said finally, one day at a time. Her lip trembled. Thank you. As the kettle whistled behind him, Jack stood to pour more water, trying to keep his own hands from shaking. Ethan came in from school that afternoon to find Rebecca sitting at the old upright piano in the shed, her fingers coaxing a gentle melody out of the cracked keys. He watched her for a while before speaking. You're really good. She smiled over her shoulder. It's been years, but it's like riding a bike, I guess. Do you know any Christmas songs? She laughed softly. A few. He slid onto the bench beside her. We used to sing with Mom, but Dad doesn't like to anymore. Rebecca looked at him kindly. Maybe one day he will again. And as she played, the snow continued to fall beyond the frosted windows, but inside something warmer stirred. A memory given breath. A new note in a song long thought forgotten. Neither of them noticed Jack standing just outside the shed door, listening, not just to the music, but to hope and to home. The wind picked up again that night. Jack stood on the back porch in a flannel jacket sipping lukewarm coffee while watching the trees sway beneath the weight of fresh snow. The world was quiet but tense, like the forest held its breath before something broke. His fingers curled tighter around the mug. Inside the cabin, Rebecca was helping Ethan dry dishes, laughing softly at one of his middle school jokes. Her laughter was light, almost surprising. It was the first time Jack had heard it, and it did something to him. Warmed him, unsettled him. He told himself it was the coffee, or the cold. They had fallen into a rhythm over the past few days. Rebecca cooked simple meals, helped Ethan with his writing assignments, and even tuned the old piano in the shed using YouTube tutorials on Jack's cracked laptop. Jack watched it all from the edges, quietly, cautiously, like a man who'd found a photograph he wasn't sure he was allowed to hold. But tonight, something was off. He couldn't name it. A tension in the air, or maybe in her. She'd seemed distant all day. When he'd asked if she was all right, she'd smiled too fast and said, "Just tired." But the bags under her eyes had deepened. Her hands shook slightly when she buttered toast. And now, standing in the dark beneath a sky full of tumbling clouds, Jack knew that storm wasn't just weather. It was coming from inside her. He turned toward the driveway when headlights slashed through the trees. Not just any headlights. Bright, slow-moving, deliberate. An SUV. His gut tightened. The vehicle stopped at the foot of the cabin's drive engine, idling. Jack stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching over frozen ground. The SUV didn't move. No one got out. Then, as suddenly as it arrived, it reversed tires, slipping slightly, and disappeared down the snowy road. Jack's breath came fast now. He set the mug down on the railing and went inside. Rebecca was sitting on the edge of the couch, pale, her back stiff. She looked up before he could speak. Was it him? She asked, barely a whisper. Jack hesitated, then nodded. Could have been anyone, but something didn't feel right. She closed her eyes. Her fingers dug into the blanket draped over her lap. "He's found me." Jack didn't ask how she knew. She knew. That kind of fear had its own memory, its own scent. "What does he want?" Jack asked carefully. Rebecca opened her eyes. They were wide wet with panic, but there was something hard in her voice too. "To drag me back. Not because he wants me. Because he wants to control me. Because I had the nerve to leave." Jack paced slowly, trying to think. "Do you have a restraining order?" I tried. "But he's smart. He knows how to keep it just legal enough. I have one from Oregon, but it doesn't follow me here automatically unless I register it with the county. Then we'll do that first thing tomorrow." Rebecca looked up at him, searching his face. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he cut in, voice firm. "You're not going through this alone." She stared at him a long moment. "You don't even know everything." "Then tell me." She inhaled sharply, then stood. "He hurt me. Not just bruises. He made me feel small, powerless. He kept me away from my daughter by convincing the court I was unstable, said I had depressive episodes. I mean, maybe I did, but I wasn't dangerous. I was just broken." Jack nodded slowly, letting the silence hold space between them. "And the worst part," she said, her voice cracking. "I started believing him. Started thinking maybe I really didn't deserve her. Until I remembered you. The boy on the bench. The stranger who said I was worth saving." Jack's throat tightened. Rebecca wiped her eyes. "I came here to rebuild. I didn't expect anything else. Not this house. Not your kindness. Not Ethan's warmth. I just wanted to survive." Jack stepped closer, his voice low. "You deserve more than surviving." A long pause. Then the front door rattled. They both jumped. Jack moved quickly, checking the lock. Still secure. He peeked through the curtain but saw nothing, just shadows cast by wind-blown branches. But the unease lingered. "I want you both in my room tonight," Jack said. "I'll sleep out here, just in case." Rebecca hesitated. "I don't want to cause problems." "This isn't a negotiation," he said gently. "It's protection." She nodded slowly. Later, as Jack laid a blanket out on the couch, he stared up at the ceiling and listened for every sound: the heater cycling a creak from the roof, a muffled cough from Ethan. Then the soft click of the bedroom door opening. Rebecca stepped out. She was wrapped in one of Megan's old robes, the blue one with the frayed cuffs. Her hair fell over her shoulders, eyes shadowed with something deeper than fear. "I can't sleep," she said. Jack sat up, rubbing his neck. "Me neither." She sat on the arm of the chair near the fire, close but not too close. "Did you ever feel like you were just waiting for the next bad thing?" she asked. "Even when everything's quiet, all the time after Megan passed," he said truthfully. "I used to check Ethan's breathing every hour, like I was daring the world to take one more thing." She looked at him. Truly looked. "How do you stop?" "You don't," he admitted. But after a while, the quiet starts to feel real again. Rebecca exhaled, and her shoulders sank, a little relief mixed with sorrow. "I'm tired, Jack. Tired of running. Tired of being afraid." "You don't have to run anymore," he said. "Not here." The room was warm, silent but full. Rebecca stood, and for a heartbeat, Jack thought she might lean in, say something, reach for his hand. But instead, she placed something on the table beside him, the envelope. "I think I'm ready to open it now," she whispered. "But I want to read it in the morning, with sunlight." Jack nodded. When she disappeared into the hallway, he sat back and stared at the small, time-worn letter. Snow still fell outside, but inside the storm had shifted, and morning would come. Morning came without fanfare, just a slow melting of shadows across the walls and the steady creak of pine trees thawing in the cold. Jack sat at the kitchen table, watching the kettle steam. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd drifted off sometime after 3, but his dreams had been filled with strange echoes. Train whistles, snow swirling through high ceilings, and a teenage girl on a bench who wouldn't lift her face. Now he was back in the quiet, staring at a letter he didn't remember writing. The envelope sat unopened between his fingers, brittle at the edges, but still intact. Rebecca hadn't come out of the bedroom yet. Ethan had already left for school, throwing his backpack over one shoulder and tossing Jack a look that said more than it asked. "Are we okay?" Jack had nodded. Just once. Not a yes, not a no, just holding steady. The bedroom door opened, soft creak and all. Rebecca stepped into the kitchen wearing a faded sweater over jeans, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She looked better this morning, still tired, but not brittle. "You didn't open it?" she asked gently, eyeing the envelope. Jack shook his head. "Didn't seem right to do it without you." She sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. The silence between them wasn't tense, it was waiting. Rebecca inhaled. "Do you want to?" He hesitated, then nodded. He slid a butter knife gently under the flap and opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single page folded in thirds. Jack unfolded it and began to read aloud, his voice quiet at first, then growing more steady. "December 20th, 1998. If you're reading this, I guess you took the ticket. I don't know your name, and maybe we'll never meet again. But something about the way you sat there, like the world had already decided who you'd be, it didn't sit right with me. I've had bad days, too. Days when it felt like nothing would get better. But there was still something in you that looked like hope. So take the ride. Go home or go forward or just get out of here. Maybe this is nothing. Or maybe it's everything. But tonight I needed to believe that kindness could still mean something. And maybe you did too." Jack Monroe. When he finished, Jack laid the letter on the table between them. His throat felt dry. The room was silent but thick with emotion, like the words still echoed in the walls. Rebecca didn't speak for several seconds. Then quietly, "You wrote that not knowing anything about me, not even my name, but it was the only thing in the world that made me feel seen." Jack looked up. "I didn't remember writing it. Not fully. But now—" "You do?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah." Rebecca reached out her fingers, brushing the edge of the letter. "You saved me, Jack. Not just that night. You gave me something I didn't have permission to believe I was worth saving." Jack sat back, the weight of those years settling into him. "And I never knew." "That's the thing about kindness," she said. "You don't always get to see where it lands. But that doesn't mean it didn't grow." A silence passed between them, not empty, but full. Then Jack stood, walked to the cabinet, took down a small tin box from the top shelf, one he hadn't opened in years. He set it on the table, popped the lid. Inside were old things, dusty things. A photo of Megan holding a toddler Ethan, a movie stub from their first date, a worn ribbon from the hospital nursery, and beneath them a journal leather-bound, cracked with age. Jack flipped to the middle and ran his finger down a page. December 1998. "I kept a journal back then," he said. "Tried to write when things got too loud in my head." He read from it quietly. "Saw a girl at the station today. Looked lost in more ways than one. Gave her my spare ticket. Didn't know what else to do. I hope it gets her where she needs to go. I hope it means something." Rebecca covered her mouth, eyes glassy. "You wrote it down." Jack nodded. "I guess I needed to believe in something, too." She smiled, but it trembled. "I wish I'd found you sooner. You found me now." He meant it, and she heard it. But the moment didn't last. A knock came at the door. Sharp, 3 quick raps. Jack and Rebecca froze. Then another knock, slower this time. Jack stood, motioned for her to stay put. He walked to the door, peeked through the curtain. A man in a black wool coat stood at the edge of the porch. Clean-shaven, tall. Not a neighbor. Not local. Jack opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" The man didn't smile. "I'm looking for Rebecca Hayes." Jack's body stiffened. "Who's asking her husband?" The words were ice. Rebecca stepped into view behind Jack, but he held out a hand. "She doesn't want to see you." "I'm not here to fight," the man said smoothly. "I just want to talk." Rebecca's voice came from behind. "Then you can talk through my lawyer." The man's gaze flicked to her. "You've had lawyers before. You never win." Jack stepped forward, shoulders squared. "She's not alone this time." A long pause. Then the man gave a tight, mocking smile. "We'll see how long that lasts." He turned and walked down the porch steps, climbed into the SUV Jack had seen the night before, and drove away slowly, deliberately leaving deep tracks in the snow. Jack closed the door and locked it. Rebecca was shaking. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Jack touched her shoulder. "We'll go to the sheriff. Register your protection order here. You'll be safe." She nodded, tears brimming. "I'm not running this time." Jack looked at her and saw not the girl from the train station, not the woman from the broken car, but someone standing her ground even as her knees buckled. And in that moment he realized something else. This wasn't about saving her anymore. It was about standing beside her while she saved herself. The logs snapped in the fireplace, throwing amber light across the room as night folded in over the cabin. Outside, the temperature had plunged again, turning the slushy thaw from earlier into brittle ice. Inside, however, the warmth was not only from the fire, but from something quieter, harder, one. Jack sat on the floor next to the hearth, feeding another split log into the flames. Rebecca stood at the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the snowfall begin again. She hadn't spoken much since her husband's visit that morning. Neither had Jack. Some silences weren't born of avoidance, but of knowing exactly how heavy words could be. When she finally turned around, her face was pale, but set with a kind of tired resolve. "You don't have to keep pretending like I'm not blowing up your whole life," she said quietly. Jack looked up, a half-smile flickering and dying just as fast. "You're not." "I am," she said. "You have a son. A job. A life that works maybe not perfectly but well enough. And now I've dragged a storm into your front yard." Jack stood brushing his hands on his jeans. "You didn't drag the storm, Rebecca. It was already coming. You just walked into it trying to find shelter." Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. "He's not going to stop. You know that, right? That man, he doesn't care about me. He cares about control, about winning. And when he feels like he's losing, he becomes dangerous. Jack nodded slowly. That's why we went to the sheriff today, and why you're staying right here. But what if you don't have to finish that sentence? His voice was calm but firm. You don't have to run anymore. Rebecca sat down slowly in the chair across from the fire, hands clasped in her lap. For a moment, they both watched the flames without speaking. Then she said, "You asked me once what I was running from. I didn't tell you everything." Jack waited. He never hit me in public, never raised his voice where it could be recorded. He'd wait until the door closed. Then he'd accuse me of lying about where I'd been, of making him look bad. He said I was too emotional to be a mother. He called me unfit, unstable, and I started believing him. Because it's not the bruises that get to you, it's when your own voice starts to sound unreliable in your head. Jack's jaw clenched. Did anyone try to help? She shook her head. Friends grew distant. My aunt believed him. The court-appointed counselor said I was overwhelmed and recommended a break in custody. I spiraled. I shut down. And when I finally left, he kept hope from me. Said it was for her stability. But it was punishment, because I stopped obeying. Jack sat down beside her, letting the words sink into the warmth between them. You did something most people never have the strength to do, he said. You left. Rebecca exhaled shakily. It didn't feel like strength. It felt like defeat. It wasn't. She looked at him, then really looked. And you've been carrying something too. I can see it in the way you protect Ethan, the way you step aside when someone offers kindness like you're not sure you deserve it. Jack stared into the fire. After Megan died, I wasn't angry. That came later. First I was just hollow, like I was doing a bad impression of being human. Ethan was 5. He didn't understand why his mom stopped reading him bedtime stories, why she stopped waking up. Rebecca reached for his hand gently. And you had to be everything for him. I wasn't, Jack said, not at first. I fumbled through school lunches and parent-teacher meetings and pediatrician visits. I once sent him to school in his pajamas by accident. But he never blamed me. He just adapted. That's what kids do when they're loved. A silence bloomed between them, but this one wasn't painful. It was full of shared grief, mutual survival, and the slow stitching of something new. Then Jack asked, "Do you have any pictures of her?" Of Hope. Rebecca's hand went to the chain around her neck. She reached under her sweater and pulled out a small locket. Inside was a photo barely the size of a postage stamp of a curly-haired girl with bright eyes and a shy smile. "She's beautiful," Jack said. "She's everything good I ever did," Rebecca whispered. "I was a wreck when she was born, but when I held her God, I felt like I had been handed a second chance at life." Jack studied the photo a moment longer. "You're going to get her back." Rebecca blinked, eyes filling. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," he said. "But not because of luck. Because you're fighting for her. Because you never stopped." She let the locket fall gently against her chest. "It's hard to believe I deserved that kind of ending." Jack's voice was steady. "Then I'll believe it for you until you can." Suddenly the fire flared, a log collapsing with a burst of embers. Jack stood to stoke it, but Rebecca didn't move. She sat there motionless as tears finally spilled down her cheeks, quiet, unforced, like snow melting beneath spring light. "I haven't cried in front of anyone in years," she said, wiping her face with her sleeve. Jack looked over his shoulder. "That's not weakness. That's coming back to life." She smiled through the tears. "You sound like someone who's read too many grief books." He chuckled. "Nope. Just someone who's spent too many nights staring at ceilings." A silence followed this one, thinner, more tentative. Then Rebecca said, "You know what? I remember most about that night at the train station." Jack glanced over. "What it wasn't the ticket. It wasn't the letter. It was that you didn't look away. You saw me. Not as a problem. Not as a lost girl. Just as someone worth stopping for." Jack's chest ached in a way that felt like healing. I remember your eyes." She added softer now. "They looked exactly like they do now, like they're always searching for who needs saving next." Jack crouched by the fire, meeting her gaze. Maybe this time he said I was just trying to save myself. And in that fragile quiet, as the flames crackled behind them and the snow whispered against the glass, something between them solidified, not as rescue, not as romance, not yet, but as trust. And trust, Jack knew, was the beginning of everything. The town of Pine Haven shimmered under a fresh coat of snow sunlight bouncing off rooftops like diamonds scattered by a careless hand. It was the kind of day that looked gentle from a window, but bit the skin hard if you stayed outside too long. Jack pulled the truck into the parking lot behind the community clinic and cut the engine. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat adjusting the scarf around her neck, her fingers visibly trembling. "You sure about this?" he asked. She gave a tight nod. "They said the clinic has an opening. Part-time nursing support. It's not much, but it's a start." Jack turned to her voice, firm but kind. "You don't owe anyone a flawless first impression. You just have to be you." Rebecca gave him a weak smile, then opened the door before she could talk herself out of it. The clinic wasn't large, just 4 examination rooms, 1 front desk, and a break room that smelled like instant coffee and expired granola bars, but to Rebecca it looked like the first open door in years. Inside, the receptionist glanced up. A woman in her late 50s with reading glasses and a cardigan so thick it could have doubled as insulation. "You, Rebecca Hayes?" she asked. "Yes, I'm here about the support nurse position." The woman looked her up and down. "You come highly recommended. Sheriff Matthews said we ought to make room for you." Rebecca blinked. The Sheriff Jack stepped up behind her. "We talked to him yesterday. Told him what you've been through. He vouched for her. Said if anyone deserves a second chance around here, it's you." The receptionist softened. "Well then, come on in. Dr. Powell will see you." Rebecca turned to Jack. "You don't have to wait." "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. The interview didn't take long. Dr. Powell, a wiry man with silver hair and sharp but kind eyes, reviewed her license, asked about her experience, and nodded thoughtfully at her answers. She didn't over-explain, didn't plead. She simply presented her truth with quiet confidence. When she emerged, 20 minutes later, her cheeks were pink, but not from cold. "I start Monday," she said. Jack smiled. "That's progress." Rebecca exhaled like she'd been underwater too long. "It's the first yes I've gotten in years." Back in the truck, she looked out the window as the town passed them by. "Do you think it's weird? That I feel guilty for something going right?" Jack didn't answer at first. Then he said, "No, I think it means you remember what it's like when everything didn't." They drove in silence for a while. Back at the cabin, Ethan was waiting on the front porch backpack on bouncing a rubber ball off the steps and catching it lazily. When he saw Rebecca, he grinned. "Did you get the job?" She nodded, surprised by how much his reaction mattered to her. "That's cool," he said. "You gonna be working with sick people and stuff? Something like that?" He hesitated, then said, "Dad says you're trying to get your daughter back." Rebecca blinked. "He told you that?" Ethan shrugged. "He tells me the truth, even when it's hard." Rebecca sat beside him on the step. "She's 12. Her name's Hope." Like the word, exactly like the word. He looked down at the ball. "Do you miss her all the time?" "All the time," she whispered. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. "Then I miss my mom like that, too." They sat there, 2 wounded souls in different stages of healing, and Rebecca felt something deep inside her start to soften. That evening, she stood in the kitchen slicing carrots for stew when Jack came in holding a thick envelope in one hand. "This came in the mail," he said. She wiped her hands and took it. Her name was handwritten on the front. She recognized the address, the courthouse in Oregon. Her breath caught. With shaking hands, she opened it and unfolded the letter. "They've scheduled the hearing," she said, voice tight. "In 3 weeks. I'll need to provide proof of income, stable housing, and a personal reference." "You have all 3, Jack said. She shook her head. "A paycheck stub and a roof are one thing. but a reference who's going to vouch for someone with a past like mine. Jack didn't hesitate. I will. Rebecca looked up, startled. You're living under my roof, helping raise my son. You're steady, responsible, and more courageous than half the people I know. They want a witness to your character. They've got one. She stared at him, her voice barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Jack's expression softened, but his eyes stayed steady. Because someone once told you that you were worth saving, and now you're proving them right. The next morning, Rebecca stood at the mirror pulling her hair back before her shift at the clinic. She looked at her reflection and didn't flinch. The bruises were gone. The scars weren't. But she wasn't hiding anymore. In the hallway, Ethan knocked once. Rebecca, come in. He stepped in holding out something in his hand, a pencil drawing on crumpled paper. It was a sketch of her at the piano, a little girl sitting beside her. Hope drawn from imagination. Rebecca pressed a hand to her chest. Did you draw? This Ethan shrugged. I thought it might help. You know, for court. If they need to see how much you care. Tears sprang to her eyes. This is more than help. Ethan looked away, embarrassed. You're kind of like family now. That okay? Rebecca hugged him tight, her voice breaking. That's more than okay. In that quiet cabin under snow-covered eaves and surrounded by evergreens that never stopped reaching toward the light, Rebecca finally began to believe she was doing more than just surviving. She was rebuilding, and this time she wasn't doing it alone. The wind returned with teeth. That evening, as Jack loaded more firewood onto the porch, he caught a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. A vehicle dark and low rolling to a slow stop just beyond the curve of the driveway. Jack's breath misted in the freezing air as he stepped to the edge of the porch, shielding his eyes from the glare of the headlights. It was the same black SUV, the same quiet hum, but this time it didn't idle and drive off. This time the driver's door opened. Rebecca stepped outside behind him, hugging her coat around her tightly. One look at her face and Jack knew she'd recognize the man before he even emerged. Chase. He looked exactly how Jack imagined him from Rebecca's restrained descriptions, mid-40s, clean-cut with a politician's posture and a predator's eyes. His black overcoat billowed in the wind as he climbed the porch stairs like he owned them. Rebecca, he said, his tone smooth and rehearsed. You look well. She didn't answer. Her knuckles whitened where they gripped the doorframe. Jack stepped between them. She's not interested in whatever you came here to say. Chase's eyes flicked to him, mildly amused. You must be the mechanic turned bodyguard. No, Jack said, voice steady. Just the man standing between you and someone you don't get to hurt anymore. Chase smirked. You think this is about bruises? You're naive. This is about my daughter, and the court system that always takes the word of an unstable woman until someone puts a spotlight on the truth. Rebecca found her voice. The truth is, you made me afraid to breathe without permission. You didn't love me. You managed me. He turned to her, cold and venomous now. And you ran. With no warning, no goodbye to hope. You abandoned her. Jack took a step forward. Enough. Chase's tone shifted, silken again, calculated. This can still be settled civilly. Drop the custody motion. We avoid another public embarrassment. Rebecca's eyes didn't waver. No. He smiled, dangerous and tight. Then I'll see you in court. With a glance at Jack, equal parts curiosity and disdain, he turned and descended the stairs. I wouldn't get too attached, he called over his shoulder. She tends to collapse under pressure. Then he was gone. The SUV's tires spun briefly on the icy road, then disappeared into the tree line. Jack turned to Rebecca. Her face was pale, but her spine was straight. Her hands no longer trembled. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was furious. I'm sorry, Jack said quietly. He shouldn't have gotten this close. She nodded, blinking hard. I knew he'd come. I just didn't know how much it would still feel like being hunted. Jack placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He's trying to get in your head. Don't let him. Rebecca let out a shaky breath. He's banking on me folding. That's how he wins. Then let's not give him that. That night, Jack called Sheriff Matthews reporting the confrontation in detail. The sheriff, already sympathetic to Rebecca's situation, agreed to file a formal report and expedite the extension of her protection order across state lines. He steps foot on your property again. Call me. Don't open the door. He's on notice now, Matthews said over the line. After hanging up, Jack returned to the living room where Rebecca sat curled on the couch, her fingers toying with the hem of her sweater. I keep asking myself what kind of man tears down the mother of his own child just to win, she said, voice hollow. Jack didn't sit. He stood across from her, the firelight flickering across his face. The kind of man who sees people as property, and when they stop obeying, he calls them broken. Rebecca looked up. I believed I was broken. For so long. But you're not. She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. I must look pathetic to you. You look like someone who's still standing, he said. That's not pathetic. That's powerful. They didn't speak for a long time after that. The fire burned low. Ethan had already gone to bed. Jack walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to scan the edge of the woods. Nothing. Just shadows. Still, he double-checked the locks. Later, when the house was silent and the wind outside howled like something ancient, Jack lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with every possibility. What if Chase filed a motion to discredit Rebecca? What if he used old photos, twisted her past into a weapon? What if Jack wasn't enough? But then he remembered something else, her eyes blazing, not with fear, but with fire. Her voice no longer cracking, but clear. Rebecca wasn't the same woman who had curled up in the driver's seat of a frozen sedan. She was someone rising. The next morning, the sky was bruised with gray as they ate breakfast around the kitchen table. Rebecca sipped her coffee, eyes focused on a single page in front of her, her official visitation petition. Jack had helped her fill it out the night before, every box checked, every field completed with care. I'll drive you to the post office after work, he said. We'll overnight it. She nodded. Then Ethan entered the room with a question she hadn't expected. Will I ever meet her? He asked, setting down his backpack. Rebecca blinked. Hope? He nodded. She's kinda my age, right? I think it'd be cool. Her heart swelled in her chest. I'd like that, if it's okay with your dad. Jack, who had been washing dishes, turned and smiled softly. I think it's more than okay. Ethan grinned, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and added, maybe she can draw too. Then we can trade sketches. When he left, Rebecca pressed her palms to her face. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear someone say she belonged here. She does, Jack said. So do you. Rebecca met his gaze across the table. Even after everything, especially after everything. And though the storm outside loomed large legal battles, courtrooms Chase's shadows, something had shifted. Rebecca wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was claiming what was hers. With truth, with fire, with love. The courthouse in Medford, Oregon loomed ahead, its pale stone facade sharp against a steel-gray sky. The kind of place that felt cold, even in spring. Jack guided the truck into the visitor's parking lot, knuckles white on the steering wheel. He glanced at Rebecca beside him, her jaw-clenched eyes trained on the building like it might evaporate if she stared long enough. You can still back out, he said softly. She turned to him, her voice firm. If I do, I lose her for good. Jack gave a single nod. Then we walk in together. Inside, the hallways were sterile and humming with quiet tension. Shuffling papers murmured names, bailiffs standing stiff-backed. Rebecca had traded her usual jeans and sweater for a navy blue dress and blazer borrowed from a neighbor. Her hair was pinned back neatly. On the outside, she looked composed. Inside, Jack could feel the storm. They sat outside courtroom B for 20 minutes before being called in. Rebecca held a folder in her lap, proof of income rental agreement, her employment letter from the clinic. Jack carried the written testimony he'd prepared the night before, printed on thick, cream-colored paper that felt too formal for something so personal. The courtroom was small, functional. A wooden bench for the judge, another for the clerk, 2 tables, a few rows of seating behind. In the corner, Chase sat with his attorney polished and poised in a tailored suit. He didn't glance at Rebecca when she entered, but Jack saw the flicker of a smirk tug at the corner of his mouth. The judge, a woman in her 60s with clear eyes and silver-streaked hair, reviewed the docket and nodded. "We're here today to hear a motion to reinstate joint visitation rights to the petitioner, Ms. Rebecca Hayes, regarding minor child Hope Hayes, currently in temporary custodial care with the respondent." Rebecca stood when asked. Her voice didn't shake. She presented her documents, outlined her new job, her stable residence, her therapy sessions. She answered questions from Chase's lawyer, stiff, cold questions aimed at discrediting her. "Weren't you unemployed for nearly 2 years? Didn't you leave the state without notifying the court? Have you ever been diagnosed with depressive symptoms?" "Yes," she said to each with unwavering honesty. "But I never stopped trying to be better." Then the judge turned to Chase's lawyer. "You've submitted statements asserting the petitioner is emotionally unstable. Do you have a witness present?" "I do," the lawyer said, standing. "However, the petitioner has submitted a personal reference that we have not yet reviewed." Jack rose from his seat. "I'm the reference," he said, walking toward the stand. Chase's lawyer frowned. "Please state your relationship to Ms. Hayes." Jack took the oath, then met the judge's gaze squarely. "My name is Jack Monroe. I'm a single father, a mechanic in Pine Haven, Nevada, and Ms. Hayes has been living in my home for the past 2 months. Chase leaned forward, slightly interested now. Jack continued, voice even, but laced with quiet power. "When I found Rebecca, she was sleeping in her car during a snowstorm. She didn't come to my door asking for charity. She came trying to survive." He looked at the judge. "I've seen trauma before. My wife passed when our son was 5. I know what it's like to be broken and keep showing up for someone who depends on you. Rebecca has shown up for my son for herself, and now for her daughter. She is not reckless. She is not unstable. She's the strongest person I know." He paused, letting the silence settle like dust. "If we're here to determine whether this little girl has a mother who's worthy of her time, her presence, then you're wasting your time. Because that little girl is already lucky. She just doesn't know it yet." Chase's lawyer made an objection. "Mr. Monroe has no formal custody or legal authority. His opinion is anecdotal." The judge raised a hand. "Noted, but testimony regarding character is still admissible." Jack sat down. Rebecca looked over at him, eyes wide with gratitude. Then the judge turned to Chase. "Mr. Hayes, would you like to make a statement?" Chase stood. His voice was smooth as silk. "Your Honor, I'm simply trying to provide consistency for my daughter. I have no interest in keeping her mother from her if Ms. Hayes can demonstrate long-term stability." The judge raised a brow. "So, you are not contesting visitation. I'm asking for it to be conditional," he said, smiling faintly. "Supervised, until such time as the petitioner proves over time that she can offer a safe, consistent environment." Rebecca opened her mouth to object, but the judge held up a hand. "I've heard enough." Everyone sat frozen. The judge leaned back, scanning the file before her. "This court recognizes the previous issues regarding employment housing and emotional stress. However, I also see evidence of recovery gainful employment, verified residence community support, and personal testimony of character." She looked up. "Temporary supervised visitation is granted beginning next week. The court encourages both parties to pursue mediation and establish a regular visitation schedule. A full review will be held in 90 days. Rebecca let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Jack placed a steadying hand on her back as she slumped slightly, like the air had finally come back into her lungs. Outside the courtroom, Rebecca walked down the steps slowly, her heels echoing across the concrete. She stopped at the bottom, pulling in a breath of cold, wet air. "I didn't win everything she said." Jack stood beside her. You won the next chapter. She turned to him, eyes full. I get to see her. I get to hold her. He nodded. Thank you, she said, for standing with me. I didn't stand with you, he said gently. I stood beside you. Rebecca paused. Then she reached into her bag and pulled something out, an envelope. Worn. Familiar. Jack blinked. That's... She nodded. The letter. I've carried it every day since I opened it. She pressed it into his hand. I want you to keep it now, she whispered. Because I'm not surviving on hope anymore. I'm standing in it. Jack looked down at the envelope in his hand, his own handwriting from a lifetime ago. A full circle. A message sent through time. And now a life reclaimed because of it. The road home wound through the forest like a memory, familiar, quiet, and raw. The truck's tires hummed over the pavement as snow-dusted pines blurred past the windows. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the heater vent, his fingers stiff from hours in the courtroom. Rebecca sat beside him, silent but not distant. Her gaze fixed on the road ahead, lips parted slightly like she was still absorbing the weight of everything. She'd held herself together until the truck had pulled out of the courthouse lot. Then came the silence, the kind that didn't need comfort, just space. Now, somewhere between Medford and the cabin, she spoke. I thought it would feel more victorious. Jack nodded slowly. It's not the movies. It's real life. I know. She paused, eyes shimmering. I pictured her running into my arms. I pictured everything I've missed being wiped away. But instead, I'm going to see her for 1 hour a week, with someone else watching. Jack didn't offer false hope. He didn't say it was a step or that it was better than nothing. He knew better than that. So he said the only thing that mattered. She's going to see you. Rebecca swallowed hard. Yeah. And one day he added, she's going to understand why you fought like this. She'll see the difference between someone who keeps a child out of spite and someone who climbs through fire to get back to her. Rebecca turned to him, her voice raw. I'm scared I won't be enough. You already are, Jack said, eyes still on the road. And when she meets Ethan, she'll see it too. That brought a soft laugh from her, hoarse but real. Ethan's going to try to impress her with his sketches and trivia facts. He gets that from Megan. Jack said, then smiled. The stubborn optimism. That's mine. They pulled into the driveway just after sunset. The porch light glowed warm against the fresh snow. Inside, Ethan was waiting, sitting cross-legged on the floor, working on a drawing. He looked up when they came in. Well, he asked. Rebecca smiled, slow and full of something she hadn't shown before, relief. I get to see her, starting next week. Ethan stood. That's awesome. Then he held out a folded piece of paper. I made this. Rebecca opened it carefully. It was a picture of 2 stick figures, one clearly her, the other a smaller version labeled Hope. They stood under a tree, smiling with a heart drawn between them. Rebecca bit her lip to keep it from trembling. This is perfect. You think she'll like it? Ethan asked. I think she'll keep it forever, she said. Just like I kept that letter from your dad. Ethan looked at Jack, eyebrows raised. Letter. Jack laughed softly. Long story. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Jack found Rebecca standing outside on the porch wrapped in a blanket, her breath rising in soft clouds. She didn't look cold, just quiet. He joined her. The stars are bright tonight, she said. Jack followed her gaze. They always are after the storm. They stood in silence for a moment until Rebecca finally said, You changed everything for me. Twice. First with a train ticket, then with a home. Jack looked at her, the porch light catching the edges of her face. You were the one brave enough to come back. She turned toward him. When I read your letter back then, I didn't know what kind of man you were. I just imagined someone kind, someone who saw me. Jack's voice was low. I didn't know what kind of woman you'd become, but watching you fight for hope for yourself, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Rebecca looked down. "I'm still scared." "So am I," Jack admitted. "But sometimes the people who are scared are the ones paying the most attention." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. "I never planned on you walking into my life," he said. "But now that you have, I can't imagine this place without you in it." Her eyes filled with tears. What if I still lose her? What if everything falls apart again? Jack didn't answer right away. Then gently, "Then we'll rebuild. Together." Rebecca stepped into his arms. They stood there under the stars, two people who had once lived at the edge of silence now finding peace in the sound of each other's heartbeats. The next afternoon, Rebecca stood at the front of the cabin, suitcase in hand. The drive to Medford wasn't long, but this time she was going alone. The first visit with Hope would be in a supervised space monitored by a counselor and a neutral court rep. Rebecca had spent hours picking her outfit hours rehearsing what she'd say. "I'll be back before dinner," she told Jack. "You don't owe me a schedule," he said, then added, "but I'll leave the porch light on." Ethan handed her a wrapped bundle as drawing with a note he'd written himself. "You have a team now. Teams win." She smiled, tucked it in her coat, then got in the truck. The reunion didn't happen the way she'd imagined it. There were no running embraces, no tears of recognition. Hope entered the room cautiously clutching a plush elephant. She looked taller than Rebecca remembered, more guarded, but when their eyes met, something flickered. Rebecca didn't cry. She just knelt and said the only truth that mattered. "I've missed you, every single day." Hope didn't run to her. She didn't speak. But after a few moments, she walked over and sat beside her. And that, for now, was enough. When Rebecca returned that evening, the sky was deepening into dusk. Jack met her on the porch. "Well," he asked. She exhaled. She didn't say much, but she sat beside me, and when the hour ended, she asked if I'd come again next week. Jack smiled. "She will." Rebecca's voice cracked. "I think she remembers me. Somewhere deep down." "She does," Jack said. "Just like you remembered yourself." She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you think we're allowed to be happy, even after everything?" Jack didn't hesitate. "I think we're required to be. Because of everything." And as the wind whispered through the trees and the porch light glowed golden above them, Rebecca stepped through the doorway of the cabin not as a guest, not as someone healing, but as someone coming home. The first snow of March came quietly dusting the evergreens like powdered sugar. Pine Haven had a way of holding on to winter longer than it should, like an old friend reluctant to leave. But the signs of spring were there: budding trees, longer sunsets, birdsong breaking the hush of morning. Jack stood at the woodpile splitting logs one by one, the rhythm steady familiar. The echo of the axe in the stillness was less lonely these days. It sounded like life being kept warm. From the open window of the cabin came the faint sound of piano music, soft, halting, but unmistakably tender. He paused, letting the melody wash over him. Rebecca was playing again. Not practicing, not remembering. Playing. Inside the cabin smelled like cinnamon and roasted apples. Ethan sat at the table sketching comic panels, his latest obsession. Rebecca, seated at the piano in the corner, hummed along quietly. Her fingers moved with grace Jack hadn't seen in months, and beside her, perched on the bench with wide eyes and a nervous smile, was a 12-year-old girl with a braid down her back and an elephant plush tucked under one arm. Hope. Their supervised visits had slowly given way to longer, unsupervised hours, then full weekends, and now this an afternoon of music and soup and normalcy. It had taken paperwork patience and more than a few tense meetings with mediators, but the judge had finally ruled in favor of shared custody. Hope would spend every other week in Pine Haven. They were building a room for her now, just off the hallway next to Ethan's. Jack stepped inside, dusting snow from his jacket. Hope looked up unsure. Jack gave her a soft smile. "You girls planning to form a band?" She giggled. just a small sound, but one that made Rebecca turn toward her daughter with wide, grateful eyes. "Hope wants to learn to play," she said. Jack nodded. "Then we'll find a piano teacher who's not half as intimidating as your mom." Rebecca rolled her eyes, laughing. Ethan looked up from his sketch pad. "We should name the band something dramatic, like the Second Chances." Hope considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I like that." Jack caught Rebecca's eye across the room. A look passed between them, not just affection, but deep, wordless knowing. They had lived through something together, fought for something together, and now they were holding it in their hands. That night, as stars spilled across the mountain sky, Jack stepped out onto the porch, the old blanket still draped over the swing. He heard the screen door creak behind him, followed by the soft crunch of footsteps. Rebecca joined him, pulling her coat tighter, her cheeks still flushed from laughter. They looked out at the woods, at the world that had held both their worst and their best. "You know," she said, "I used to think healing would feel like forgetting. Like one day I'd wake up and not remember the pain." Jack glanced over. "Does it?" "No," she said. "It feels like remembering, without drowning in it." A long silence passed. Comfortable. Full. "I thought about leaving after the first court visit," she confessed. "Packing my things, not making a fuss. I didn't want to be a burden." Jack turned to her, brow furrowed. "Why didn't you?" She looked up at him, voice barely a whisper. "Because Ethan asked me if I could stay for his birthday. And because you made space without asking me to fill it." Jack stepped closer. "You weren't a burden, Rebecca. You were the miracle I didn't know was missing." She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out something small. The train ticket. Faded, worn soft at the edges, but still intact. "I thought I'd lost it," she said. "Found it yesterday while organizing Hope's things." She'd tucked it into her sketchbook. Jack took it gently from her hands, turning it over. His handwriting was almost illegible now, but the words were still visible. "You look like you've been waiting to be saved. Go home." Rebecca touched the edge of the ticket. "Turns out I wasn't the only one saved that night." Jack's voice was rough. Maybe we were both just looking for the way back. A single light glowed from the front window of the cabin, then another Ethan's room. Then Hope's. 3 lights, 3 stories, intertwined. Rebecca leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we'll be all right?" Jack didn't hesitate. "I think we already are." They stood together, wrapped in the hush of a pine-covered world under a sky heavy with stars and promises. The past hadn't disappeared, it had simply made space for the present. For the girl who came back. For the woman who stood tall. For the man who opened a door he didn't know he'd been guarding for years. And for the family that had been waiting to find each other all along. From inside, the piano sounded again, tentative, joyful, off-key, in the most beautiful way. Jack smiled. "The Second Chances," he said. Rebecca laughed softly. "Best band name ever." And in that little cabin at the edge of the woods, under 3 lights glowing warm against the snow, something quiet and enduring took root. Not the end. But home. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another moment like this. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in second chances.